Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry podcast reading series called Poets Corner in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council, and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. So each month I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Ellen Van Neerven, who will be reading poems and talking with me on the theme of coexistence. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Ellen is recording from Brisbane in Queensland. I'd like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, the traditional custodians of the land on which Ellen lives and writes, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. Ellen Van Neerven, born in Meanjin 1990, is an award-winning writer and editor of Mununjali Yugambeh, Southeast Queensland and Dutch heritage. Ellen's first book, Heat and Light, was the recipient of the David Unaipon Award, the Dobbie Literary Award, and the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards Indigenous Writers Prize. They've written two poetry collections, Comfort Food, which was shortlisted for the NAW Premier's Literary Awards, Kenneth Slessor Prize, and Throat, which won the Kenneth Slessor Prize, the Multicultural New South Wales Award, and Book of the Year at the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards, and was shortlisted for the Queensland Literary Awards, the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, and the ALS Gold Medal. Hi, Ellen, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hi, David. How are you going?
I'm good, thank you. Good to have you on the show. So you're going to be reading poems today from your book Throat, the theme of coexistence. I checked out the definition of coexistence. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, it means the fact of living or existing together at the same time or in the same place. So at first glance, that seems like a pretty straightforward proposition. I'm guessing that it's not. Looking at the world, it seems like this is something we're not very good at. Can you tell us a bit about what you were thinking in selecting this as your theme?
Yeah, thanks. So I was talking to a poet friend of mine, Elfie Shiosaki, who's a Noongar writer from Western Australia, but we were meeting in Canberra, and we were talking. I was trying to find a word that explained, how in our poetry we write about many different things, but neither negates each other. So, for example, we can write about grief, and it can be at the same time as writing about joy, which I think is a bit of a beating pulse in Throat, where, I think a lot of it is also about pushing up against expectations that say that you can only be in one mode or be in one place at the same time. So I think that's what I was thinking about when I chose the theme.
I was wondering whether the idea of coexistence for you changed with the Australian public's negative response to the proposition that there be an Indigenous voice to Parliament.
I think that was, for me, and for many, a very difficult result. And I think it's, for me, I think it would have pointed towards, a positive future for this country.
A pathway forwards.
Mm.
Yeah. Are you thinking of coexistence not only, with one another, and with the idea of holding different things together at once, but with our past and our histories where coexistence has been, to say the least, fairly problematic?
I think so. I think, the initial theme came from, in the emotive space, but I think as you're pulling more and more from there, I think that's also something that is underlying the theme as well.
And do you think that there are particular ways in which your poetry, and this book in particular, addresses and speaks to the idea of coexistence?
I think, for example, there's this long poem that I wrote called Chermi, which is really, it's really like it's set in Chermi or Chermside, which is a northern suburb of Brisbane that has been working class, and it's also a place where a lot of Aboriginal families lived in the period where my mum was growing up, and also when I was growing up. And it's, for me, like, my family moved there in the 50s, so that's not our traditional land, but there's a sense of belonging there that I write about in that poem, and there's a sense of continuance as Aboriginal people, no matter where we're living in a very urban environment, as I mentioned in the poem, but also mentioning the history of Chermside and how it's changed so much over the last couple of decades. And so there's a sense that, everything, the past, present, future, is existing in that place. And also there's a sense of, I guess, there's some sort of strong emotions, strong negative emotions in that poem, but also some very strong positive emotions about feeling very like a close-knit family when we were growing up, and spending time there with my grandmother particularly. And so how can a shopping centre be a place of nurturing and gathering and love, is like it's, because there's like this tongue-in-cheek thing around thinking about, capitalism and class as well. So I really tried to kind of put a lot in that poem, and do it with a sense of humor.
Yeah, well, you're gonna read that poem a little bit later on, and we'll have a little chat about that. There's a lot of threads to pull out of it. But I thought I'd ask you to read a poem now.
I'll just read the first poem of Throat. Got my little sticky notes in, so I'm all prepared. So this first poem is called Memories Sometimes Come Backwards. And I wrote this poem when I was living in Melbourne on Mununjali land. Memories sometimes come backwards. They haunt, walk in. My therapist, in our last session together before she left, asked me to describe the creative process. I said a voice to throw belief at. How I sit at one side of the table to tip-tap on the laptop and the other to write in my notebook. This morning, I faced an identity crisis organizing my wardrobe. It is mid-spring, and I'm not yet warm. In my home, my country, now several hundred kilometers northeast from here, the sun sets on my shoulders. Every breath is a loss or gain of water. Here, my legs curl to my knees and my throat is always dry. Memories sometimes come backwards. They haunt, walk in. haunting, walking, and sugar from the chocolates my friends give me after the incident. We are in great admiration of how you handle yourself. We thought you conducted yourself with such dignity and grace. I did nothing but lie in my bed. As I search for a card in the chocolate box, something tells me I'm not meant to hear about what people think about me. This kind of aggrieved love until I'm dead. So I'm walking dead, haunting live, and there seems nothing left to do but to write about my trauma. My therapist has left and I haven't done my homework for my osteo. My inbox is full of sympathy and unsympathetic requests. Memories sometimes come backwards. They haunt, walk in. Writing around trauma is easy when the commissions keep coming. I'm flirting with myself. My reflection in the glass door does not need to ask for my number. My laptop screen greens with displeased fingers. After the incident, my girlfriend spends time weeding my emails. We are entwined. If I get a positive one, I promise to respond in 2 to 30 days. If I get a negative one, I promise to screenshot.
Well, I'm interested in, Ellen, in this as the opening poem to the book. So you're giving readers a kind of introduction to where you're going. What did you have in mind in opening the book with this poem?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thanks for just providing a platform for poets to read their poems, which I think is really valuable, especially giving so much time to the reading of work. For this poem, it opens the first section, which is called They Haunt Walk In. It references Natalie Harkin and Crowley Driscoll's work around haunting, which is something that really, it just felt, that I was writing this poem that, was influenced by their work, but also I wrote this poem after like a pretty weird and challenging moment in my life, which was around 2017. And it was around, and this poem has also been anthologized in a mental health anthology that came out this year. I have a mind blank of the title, but it's a really excellent.
The Red Room Poetry one?
Yeah, the Red Room one, yeah. And so I had the opportunity to be part of that wonderful book as well with this poem. So the poem, it was around this 2007. So that, I say in the poem, I mentioned the incident in inverted commas 3 times. And that incident happened in 2017, where one of my poems was set on the HSE. And as is normal, you don't know that that's going to happen. So I think what happened was I just woke up, got out of bed one day. I was living in Naarm, as I mentioned, and I had hundreds of social media messages, and it was an overwhelming incident in which I received messages from students who are also trolls, and it was the sheer number of messages was something that really was very confronting for me as someone who was on social media but that had a very minor presence, and also having a website that allowed people to contact me through the website and through social media. And there was a lot of, very racialized messages and a lot of like death threats and all that sort of stuff that I know a lot of people, unfortunately, when they're in the public eye, have that experience. But it was my first experience of having that so close. And then there was a lot of, it was a moment that there was also a lot of other people contacting me, and like journalists that had found out my number somehow and were calling me. And so I felt this immediate intrusion in my life. And that feeling brought me back to, I guess, some past trauma that I was working through. And also having people in my past contact me around that incident. And also getting some really wonderful messages of support from the community who were very sweet to me at the time. But it was just a very overwhelming moment. And I decided to just sit down and write this poem in the sort of 48 hours after this, just turned off my phone and just wrote this poem. And it was a way of just centering myself in the moment. There's a bit of tongue in cheek around, writing about trauma, because for me, I make a very specific decision not to write too much about the specific trauma that me and my family have gone through. I don't necessarily like to write about it directly. I write about it in a sort of slanted way, because I feel, often that, there's this idea of consumption culture that want to really dictate how we as Aboriginal people talk about the stories, those stories in a particular way. And I wonder who that serves. And for me, I think I try and find a way to write about what I want to write about, and not necessarily what might be other people might want to read. So I think I never, I had many opportunities to speak about that incident at the time, but I chose not to. And so for me, writing that poem and its indirect references to that seemed like the best way to sort of start off this work, to sort of just get it out of the way, and also just open up, some of the themes that I was going to be writing about in this book. For me, like, it was really important to be honest in this work about where I am and who I am, and how I like to sort of hold myself accountable as well. And so, for me, like, it was just an important kind of clearing to write that poem, and to also have it as the first poem in the book.
I mean, the incident, I was not aware of that, but the incident speaks in a way to the extraordinary power of a poem. That a poem can get such a visceral response, and from so many people. It's mind-boggling, really. I was wondering about the haunt walk-in. It's a beautiful expression, actually, in a haunting kind of way. You start each of the three stanzas with that line: "Memories sometimes come backwards, they haunt walk in." I was wondering if you were talking, if there's sort of some kind of ancestral connection here as well, if you're referring to memories that aren't consciously dredged up, but come unbidden, sneaking in, if you like, memories that they're intrusive, unwanted, that sometimes ambush you, all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, exactly what you said. I think sometimes they're memories that might be intergenerational memories. There might be a sense of unlocking, you know, something that's a really strong lineage, but it's also can be a distressing one as well. And the idea of, yeah, not having a kind of a linear framework to put those memories in, because they're backwards. They're yeah, it's really, yeah, it was for me like experiencing many different memories at the same time.
I mean, that line, memories sometimes come backwards. I had to think about that a lot. And then reread the poem, because it's a very interesting idea of how memory works. So yeah, thank you. That was illuminating for me. Later in the poem, you used the line, "I'm walking dead, haunting live." What are the specific connotations that has for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, and that's related to you know, the line around feeling like you know, I was getting so many flowers in the mail and presents, and which was really wonderful, but people were sort of doing these public write-ups about me, which were really sweet, but I thought, you know, is this my funeral or something? You know, like it was weird. And also, you know, I just disappeared from you know, the public eye for a while and just, you know, did my own thing. And so I think yeah, and also the idea of, you know, being live, you know, being, you know, you and I are live right now. This is recorded, so you'll be listening to this in a later time. But the idea of you know, being someone, being, you know, the value of that's placed on, you know, being online, being responsive, not necessarily needing to do that, I think. And so, yeah, it was really just, you know, expressing those feelings that I was having at that time.
So that reference to aggrieved love is to, you know, all those flowers, or what was that a reference to?
Yeah, I think so. I think yeah, and for some, I didn't want to, you know, push the self-indulgence, and that's why I'm glad I just wrote this poem, you know, 7 years ago, and it's done. But I think the aggrieved love was just me feeling, just sort of feeling a sense of like, how do I measure my worth as a person, you know, as a writer, as someone who yeah, is really feeling like you know, people have said the worst things about you, you know, they've said the best things about you, and that's just really just, you know, going through and thinking, well, actually none of that matters on a day-to-day level in terms of thinking about, you know, who I am and moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you use poetry to navigate through things?
In that case, I definitely did, and I think I do. I think it's part of loving poetry. I think sometimes I write poems that are just for myself as well. And sometimes, yeah, I think it's a really useful, for me, it's really useful. I know, you know, other people will do other things to process feelings and emotions. Sometimes you sit with a discomfort that you're not even sure where it comes from or what it's doing to you. And so writing about it can, and really just in a very, you know, it's like being analytical, but also being emotional at the same time. You can be moving things around, finding the right form for the poem. And that I think can be a really, really good process for me. And I know other people as well. What about yourself? Do you do that as well?
Yeah, look, I there has to be heart in my work. If there's no heart, my work just doesn't work. So it comes often from an emotional place. But yeah, I often work through things. Sometimes it does take me years. It's not necessarily a quick process. Sometimes it's more immediate, and it helps me. I mean, it's for me, it's like I'm trying to find clarity. I don't often do it, but the process of writing is about me searching for clarity as much as anything, I think. I wanted to ask you one more thing about this poem, to whether I'm not reading too much into it or not. You talked about how it's about, working through things. Is there, I sense in this poem, a kind of hope of redemption, if you like. You've got a voice to throw belief at, and you've got chocolates from friends and the love of a girlfriend. There's positive things going on through this poem. Is redemption a factor?
What do you mean by redemption? Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. That things are awful, but there's a way out of that awfulness, and that's where the redemption comes in. That there's a way to move forward and to become whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this has hopeful ending or side to the poem, and I think by its very nature and by being that first poem in the collection, it does hold that sense that things are moving, and that feeling of hopelessness that I felt at the time is even passing as I'm writing the poem. Even I'm thinking about where that poem is placed, where I was writing it, which was my little courtyard that me and my girlfriend, now ex-girlfriend, had in Naarm, and feeling, as a Queenslander, I really felt very homesick for, I ended up back here. I was 2 years in Naarm. And with that came a lot of really strong negative feelings. Maybe it's that depression that you get with, is it seasonal affective?
Oh, sad. Seasonal affective disorder. Yeah.
Disorder. Yeah. I think I really, but what happened was, as I thought, and I connected with a lot of, local Indigenous people from Victoria. I thought, well, these mob are here. They love this place. They've looked after it for thousands of years. They've, been so kind to me and welcoming. How can I not, also express my gratitude? So I think that, that sense is also in that poem as well.
Now, I think your next one that you're going to read is the Chermy, a very long Chermy poem. Wonderful.
I think this is my longest poem to date. It's a little bit of an epic poem. But I think the place that I'm describing in this poem deserves no less. Chermy. Westfield Chermy is one of our sacred sites. Gammon. My grandparents came to Chermy in the early 50s. They had a house on Fee Street where my mother and her siblings grew up. They moved there after the 2 older children were born in Waco. Mum was the second born in Fee Street. The shopping centre first opened in 1957. Chermside Drive-In Shopping Centre. Now it's the largest single-level shopping centre in Australia. It expanded and expanded and expanded over years. Mum remembers an oval surrounded by bush, swimming pool in the middle. On the weekends, she and her brothers and sisters had the choice: go to the pool or the cinema. The Dawn opened in 1928, shut in 2005. The last single-screen cinema in Brisbane. Round Chermy, everything's changed, some parts unrecognisable. But the houses near Fee Street, a pocket has stayed the same old little houses. On Fee Street, all the family's kids played together. Their names Arnie will know. The bush was all open. Could walk to the bush through to Geebung and Aspley to see friends go to school, Geebung Primary. All you had to worry about was snakes, never wore shoes. Geebung camp among the trees and Geebung groves, the roads are old roads. Nanny's warm arm against mine. Mum and Nanny touching by the bicky shop next to the butcher's. Strong, deadly women ready to take on Churmy at peak hour on a Saturday morning. Pride of knowing where every shop is, always notice a new one coming up, know the specials, keep the vouchers, push Nanny on the motor scooter, push Nanny along, save for Christmas. The decorations are different each year. Push Nanny up the hill, tell your cousin you're coming over, spend 4 hours looking for an outfit, go to Best and Less, get some undies. Nanny always bought you bonds, said those girls need the best. Keep the docket, see if it fits. Each year, our bodies change. We get older in changing rooms. We try to fit into jeans in schools that know our Black mothers, just trying to fit in. Churmy is always home. New swimmers, birthdays at the pool. The cinemas make us cry sometimes. My mum will kill me, true, if I don't separate my recycling before I leave the food court. My brother is up playing pinball. He refuses to give me his tokens and lollies. He'll be saving them for weeks. Westfield's sacred to us. Women are the gatherers, make our houses safe, make our families safe. My mum, grandmother, aunties took care of me good. I never had to worry about anything much. Protected us when we were little. We were jarjums. Now we can, with greater ease, make our own mistakes. Arnie buys me Belgian chocolates and Christmas cake each year. We buy stuff, we need stuff. We were starving when we walked up to Mima Street. The hot grass over the fence. Arnie made our sandwich and cuppa, black, always black. Carried over shelves and into tills by the tide. I have had buyer's regret, and I've also experienced lust for t-shirts I will always remember that never went on sale. We get excited the flasher it gets. We are proud of our Churmy. There has been so much change, and we are weary. Haven't ever been inside Feast Street. Have just been carried into the stories. Stood outside since I was born. Ask your Arnie. She's the youngest. Is your memory going? That's what your father says. Best house on the street. Sitting on the back steps eating ice cream. Ha! And sitting on the windowsill eating an ice block in the school holidays. Long time ago. The tree covers the house now. I don't know where to go now. Arnie says, couldn't get me off the dunny, always reading Animorphs. One day I'll see small circles in the sky, the aliens will arrive in what's left of the forest, a small bit of park compared to what it was, kid space, a cricket ground, the grass where we took Max to puppy preschool, and he got his certificate into dog adulthood. One day the aliens will arrive. I will show my new alien lover Westfield Chermside, tell her that it's sacred and must not be harmed, that inside are shiny things, delicate pathways, like the slight slope up to Coles with the warm popcorn scent. All the exits of Maya. I will show my new alien lover Westfield Chermside, and she will understand my love for Chermy. If you haven't lived life on Earth until you've been to Harris Scarf and seen their prices on bras, the brand Serena Williams likes, and met my family, my fam are pretty deadly. I want you to meet them, maybe at the Chinese restaurant, or has it closed, and we'll hold hands to the bus interchange and catch the 333. Chermy Shopping Centre is one of our sacred sites. Gammon, called these days a major suburb, a new CBD, the first Apple store. Have you seen the new food court? We haven't really started buying online. We get excited the flasher it gets. We are proud of our Chermy. There has been so much change, and we are weary. 1867, in the Gympie Gold Rush, settler invaders got stuck going north on the way to the gold fields, found trouble in the creek, Downfall Creek. The rain don't feel like rain when you're running from the car park to the entrance. Summer storms sometimes cause puddles on the floor. Arnie tells me not to slip outside the bookstore. Reminds me I'm wearing thongs 2 sizes too big. Water birds, always birds, still follow the water, and large mobs of lorikeets get drunk every night outside Chermy like teenagers. From the park, across from Arnie's place, you can see the church, the Prince Charles Hospital, and the best sunsets. I jogged here, I swam here, like Nanny and Mum and Auntie, I also lived here. My place in Chermside during uni on Kingsmill Street, opposite the library. They knocked my block down to build high-rise. Arnie walks past, keeps an eye out for me. Chermy is rising, going up in the world, rising. At Downfall Creek, the white fellas are falling, and we are rising to the airspace, to the sky. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about in that poem. I'm going to have to contain myself. I thought I'd just ask to start off with, what is this poem saying about relationship to country and about what is sacred, particularly in an urban context?
Yeah, I think this poem, I really, even though it's a silly poem, I think for me, it's really representing a lot of, what I want to say about, being who I am, being a person who grew up as an Aboriginal person, grew up in, the northern suburbs of Brisbane, even though my family, our traditional country is 1 hour south, just outside Beaudesert. So I think for me, I'm writing about country that is not my own, it's neighboring country. So I'm writing about Turrbal and Yagara country. And it's a place where I've, lived most of my life. And so both my mum's parents, who are both Aboriginal, moved to this place, and there's, really deep networks and kinship around the Aboriginal families that grew up, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families that grew up around that area. And so everyone knows each other. You have those connections. And my mum is one of 7 kids, and so they're all in this like place on Fee Street, and they knew all the local mob that lived around the place. And they watched it rapidly change. So from being my mum's voice is in this poem with permission, and my auntie's voice. And so my mum tells me stories about how it just used to all be, even though, it would have been more built up than some areas of Brisbane, there was a lot more bush than there is now. And they're just how they just didn't wear shoes and would walk to, actually, when they talk about how they were like, yeah, we used to walk from Chermy to Geebung, I was like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to walk that far. Like, it's, they're pretty big distances, but they would do it quite naturally. And how just that area was very bushy. And now with that shopping centre that was built, which started off very small and just got bigger and bigger. And so it becomes, in some ways, it's it's pushing against the natural environment. Even though Chermy still has some parkland and there's still a lot of birds there, and it's definitely changed the water system and the species that used to be there. So it's becoming this place, and then it's also the class is changing, and it being chosen as this place that's going to be like this, I guess, like a Parramatta, if I can use like a kind of an equivalent to Sydney, and so like a little city in itself, that's about half an hour out of the Brisbane centre. And so what I wanted to sort of show is, as I say, that my mum, my grandmother, my aunties, really strong, deadly women, in the way that they looked after us kids and kept those connections and made sure that, even though we didn't grow up strapped for cash, that we had everything that we needed. And so Chermy becomes that kind of mega center for getting the things that you need, like the clothes on your back, food, also just a meeting, becomes this kind of meeting place as well. And so what my family is sort of demonstrating is that, we're sort of really, still having these strong bonds to family members and also to place, even though we're in this kind of urban setting, and also just wanting to have that, that history there, and just, thinking about, just like the history there, some of it which I didn't put in, which is like around this, the segregation that my grandparents experienced when they moved to Brisbane, and that they weren't allowed in certain venues because of the color of their skin, and taxis wouldn't stop for them and stuff like that. Even even places like the RSL, there was like a different area where they would go, and so all of that stuff, it's embedded in place, even though things are moving and changing, and definitely the RSL is looking a lot flashier than it was 50 years ago. But I just wanted it to be a capture the sense of a place that's constantly moving, and the people that are living there.
It's a kind of community hub. You say in the poem that Chermy is always home. I understand relationship to country to be about nurturing it and about a sense of belonging, of being home, but it's more than just a physical connection, isn't it? Can you say something about your internal connection to country, about the spiritual and emotional aspects of it?
Yeah, I will again reiterate that by no means I'm saying this place is not my country. This place that I'm describing, Chermy, but it is someone else's country that I've formed a relationship on through growing up there. And so I think in terms of the bonds, it's around meeting my cousin there, for example. Instead of me, but definitely there's been times where I go there and I just buy a new pair of shoes, but it's also a place where I'm drawn to continue meeting, family members there, and remembering and having family members that still live there, remembering, those stories of growing up there, so I think, for me, when you have a relationship to a place, it should never be purely extractive. I think we're always thinking about how, we can, give back to a place, and how we can, make our relationship a more holistic. And I know also I just used to walk a lot and think about, thinking about making my footsteps light on that place, which has gone through so much change. So I think, I think even just writing this poem and sort of honoring that place and saying, hey, thanks for the great memories.
There's a strong intergenerational aspect to this, of stories handed down. Fee Street is a significant place for you, but at one point you say, have never been inside Fee Street, have just been carried into the story, stood outside since I was born. What comes across to me is that even though you have always stood outside physically, you've been brought inside too through the stories. Can you say something about that dichotomy for you?
It's a place, obviously, so it's where my mum and her brothers and sisters grew up, and so I would just remember, the references, like when we're all together, they'll talk about Fee Street, wonder if so and so still there. Do you remember when that family lived across the road? Like, and there'll just be, sometimes there'll be times where I think that we're going somewhere else, or I think that we're going home, and my mum and maybe my auntie would be in the car as well, or maybe we would be walking, and we would just like stop outside that house where they grew up, and just like, I don't know, like obviously not get too close because you don't want to be like trespassing on someone's place, but just like, oh yeah, that's the wind, is that tree still there? Like, that we would just be like, I'd just be listening to them talk, because I think a lot of the times, our memories of growing up are attached to place, are attached to the places that we lived, the homes that we lived. And so it was like this sort of like mini social histories, mini family history that I got through being there. So like I said in the poem, never been inside, but feel like I've been carried inside through the stories.
I mean, central to the poem, as you've sort of mentioned, is a sense of place and family and community and continuity. There is a long connection that brings with it great familiarity, but it seems at times in the poem conflicted too. So a couple of times you swing back to the lines, we get excited the flasher it gets. We are proud of our churmy. There's been so much change and we are weary. Can you expand on that sense of weariness that change brings?
Yeah, like it's important for me to have that, juxtaposition of those two feelings. I think, watching, a quaint little suburb suddenly become, full of high rises it's weary on the eye initially, as a first thing, but also just thinking about how the demographic as well is also changing of that place, and just thinking about the busyness, the building on country, the lack of the green space being intruded, and just thinking about how quickly time can go sometimes. Maybe that's also part of it. Maybe it's like, I spent my childhood here and now, I'm grown up. And so, I can't, jump the fence anymore and play in the backyard with my cousins. So I think it's also about the amount of the amount of events and life that my older people would have gone through in their life, and how things like, I know a few of them saying to me, like with the recent referendum result, that they thought that as a country that we would have voted yes because we had made certain progress, and so having to kind of keep going through, feeling like there's a sense of just a really a difference between growing up Aboriginal compared to growing up non-Aboriginal, in terms of how you're sort of accepted. Definitely for my parent, my mum and my aunties and uncles, they would have experienced a very different upbringing than I had. That of course it makes you weary, that ongoing racism and that ongoing sense of inequality that they would have experienced and still do.
And do you think that there's also a part of it that with change there's always loss?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you might, there might be a really daggy cafe, and now there's a new one and it's much better and much flasher, but there's still, there's a sense of losing something, even, that's just a superficial example, but this place upon place upon place. I think absolutely with any change there's a letting go that sort of has to happen. There's a sense of acceptance.
Would you like to read another poem?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving a little bit forward in the collection, to this poem called Treaty, which was written in 2020. This book came out in 2020, and it was written in probably about the 3 or 4 years leading up to that date. It has a visual component, and it does encourage. I have seen people that have showed me that they've signed the book. Treaty of shared power between Throats breeder and author, 2020. I don't want this to go into the pile of broken treaties. If there is a need to formalize a relationship between the parties, I'd like to do so in poetry. English is a requisite language of this treaty, but ideally the agreement would be tabled in Yugambeh. Here we recognize my country was invaded, not civilized. We recognize my sovereignty and agree that I exist independently of the Australian government. And I'm capable of entering into agreements without government intervention. I'm not sure whom I'm entering this agreement with. Are you white fella, black fella, or fella of another color? Whose country do you belong to, and whose do you occupy? What is our relationship with each other? What are our expectations of each other? Does this treaty cover the time you spend with this book, or does it go further? What of University of Queensland Press's claim? Does the fact that I've entered into an agreement with a non-Indigenous owned press complicate this treaty? What about the non-Mununjali Yugambeh people employed in the production of this book? Does their involvement allow them a share? Who is the custodian of this book? How do we coexist on this page? How can we reimagine custodianship? Is this an agreement or a series of unanswered questions? Are you willing to enter an agreement that is incomplete and subject to change?
The poem asks a series of questions, as you note, and it asks towards the end whether it is an agreement or a series of unanswered questions. What was your objective in framing the notion of treaty in this way? Are you asking all these questions because you want your readers to ask themselves these questions?
Yeah, I want the readers to ask themselves these questions.
I don't think I've ever seen it put. I mean, it's very original. I don't think I've ever seen it put this way. So it does, I think, require a reader to think these questions and think what they think about these questions. The poem is ostensibly, as its title states, a treaty of shared power between Throat's reader and an author, but it's asking questions that go beyond that. It's asking about the nature of coexistence, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. An example of coexistence is, having this book published by a non-Indigenous press, which I, write about, so, as opposed, I'll use an example, as opposed to me publishing it with an Aboriginal owned press where, a lot of that cash flow would be flowing into an Aboriginal owned non-for-profit business, and there would be more, Aboriginal staff working there that would benefit from the books that are being published, but also have an active role in looking after those books as they go through that process between as a manuscript and then something that's out in the world. So I think, I think it's for me, it's like thinking about the very nature of the publishing industry, and who's the people that are working there, and what's our relationship with each other, and what is our relationship and commitment to diversity, and ensuring that voices are being heard. I'm sure there's many amazing writers whose works have never been published. So thinking about the privilege that it comes from having the working text, but also what that means in terms of the ownership. Who owns the work? Is it the press? Is it me? Or is it my reader? In some ways, I very much feel like the reader is the owner of the work, and they get to choose where the poems go, and what they're about.
Was that something you had to consciously think about, whether or not to publish with UQP as opposed to, say, Megabala Press? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's weighing things up. I do have a really good relationship with UQP, have a good relationship with my publishers, especially Aviva Tuffield, who started working at UQP just, and was just before this book came out, a couple of years before, at a time where I wasn't sure if I wanted to publish again. But I think, and it's a press that has this extraordinary history of, having a Black Australian writing list that started in the 80s, and having the David Unaipon Award. But it's one thing to have a couple of Indigenous writers in a press. It's another thing to have a whole holistic relationship with dismantling racism and moving towards a better Australia. So I think it's definitely complicated where we choose to make those decisions and where we have those working relationships. And I think the writers that are published from UQP, the Indigenous writers, are also writers that I love, and I feel part of a community of particularly also being a Queensland press as well. Yeah, but I mean, there's all sorts of things, you know, it's an institutional press as well. It's part of the University of Queensland. I think all institutions have, you know, it's always a complicated thing to enter into a relationship with an institution.
I noticed that you have placed this poem pretty much in the center of your book. How central is the idea of treaty for you, and how does it play out in the way that you live your daily life?
Yeah, well, a very disappointing outcome of the referendum was that the Queensland opposition declared very shortly after that if they're elected, that they will scrap the path to treaty that's happening in Queensland at the moment. So because they believed with the referendum result that the majority of the public wouldn't support the path to treaty or the truth-telling process. So, you know, that's something that's really on my mind at the moment. I think we're moving into an election year next year in Queensland, because I'm a strong supporter of, you know, the truth-telling process and path to treaty, and the way that we need to, you know, as Queenslanders, we need to reckon with our history. We need to ensure that we don't maintain the status quo as something that needs to change, and Indigenous people need to be part of this change, and they need to be, you know, we need to be listened to, and we all need to be listened to, not just a small selection. So I think, yeah, for me, thinking about that in context of writing the poem 4 years ago, I think those questions were already there. I was also spending a little bit of time down in Victoria and seeing that the process that they were going through as well. And what was coming out of it was a sense of, you know, I'm a creative person, so it's my creative response to just to thinking about treaty, and so I think all of these things can exist together, and I think for me there's so much potential in thinking about some of these questions that the poem raises. And then also it was the last poem that I wrote for the collection, I think, or maybe the second last, and we were just trying to find a spot for it. Had a very supportive editor as well, Felicity Plunkett, it was my second time working with Felicity, and she was very supportive of this poem as well. She's a non-Indigenous editor that's worked with a lot of other poets that I admire, and she was really a really strong champion of my work. And so somehow it landed in the middle of, like, maybe directly in the middle of the book, and instead of potentially like being the opening or the, I don't know, like it just felt like it was a necessary disruption to the journey that the reader was going on so far.
A treaty's been a long-term aspiration of First Nations people in Australia, you know, for forever. Yothi Yindi, how many years ago was that song? As yet, there are no treaties in place between either the Commonwealth or state or territory governments and Indigenous peoples. Are you hopeful, despite what you've said the opposition is doing in Queensland and despite the rejection of the Voice referendum, that we are moving incrementally towards treaties?
Well, I'm not hopeful anymore. I think with this recent, backstepping, because the Liberal government did initially sort of say that they would back it. So I'm feeling very not hopeful at the moment. And it will be, you know, I think it's a shame because, as you said, there's been something that First Nations people have been wanting for so long, and we've actually started to make some progress in various states, and so it needs to happen. maybe another state could move the way forward, but I think we're definitely trending backwards as a country.
What would it mean to you if we reached a point where treaties were in place all across all jurisdictions?
Yeah, when you just said that, I just felt my heart kind of jump out of my chest. It's very hard to imagine. It's very, very hard to imagine. I think I immediately thought mainly of the older generation and just how pleased they would be. And I think it would just be, we could move forward with so much more grace. But just to think about the pain of, I'm thinking about people that have passed away that were in my life that were big supporters of treaty. A few of my aunties, cultural aunties, and just how validated they would feel as people.
Do you want to read another poem, Ellen?
So I'll read two poems in a row. I'll read Queens, which I've dedicated to Candy Royale, who's was a Sydney-based poet who sadly passed away a few years ago at a very young age of 37 from ovarian cancer. And Candy was such a staple in the Sydney poetry scene as a poet of Palestinian and Lebanese heritage, and as a queer poet. She was so incredibly dynamic, so fierce, so staunch, an incredible performer. And so I got a chance to meet her a few times, and I think she ran this this reading series in Sydney as well, Bird in Hand, which just was really bringing forth a new generation of poets and having a very inclusive and welcoming space. She was definitely she was so full of love and power. So I dedicated this one for her. Queens. I wish she was still here with us. Read my terms and conditions. We all carry wars within us. There was a time where I was into perfection. I was outside myself. The spiritual work didn't get done. I learnt to fear fear. I buried mountains. I didn't know that I was just beginning. And all of our stories are really about finding a connection that will help with the pain. And that we all lead back to rivers and flow into sea. And we breathe with our mothers and heartbeat with our grandmothers. Despite what is against us, we make excellent choices. And we are deserving of the fullest and warmest love. This is a time of night where we can ask ourselves, how much would we do without fear? The body labors under memory. My tongue hurts from all the things I have said and all the things I haven't. Ways of feeling invisible require proper planning. All the spit in the world, in this pool, especially mine.
Yeah, Candy Royale was a force of nature. I had the opportunity to attend those readings a number of times, and I love the passion and the energy that she brought. And you mentioned the inclusiveness. She was all about a platform for voices that were marginalized and not heard. So yes, this poem very much resonated with me. The line "We all carry wars within us" is so telling. I know that Candy carried wars within herself, but that she was undefeated by them and triumphant. Can you speak to that line and tell us more of what lies behind it for you?
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot. I'll just briefly maybe just say, yeah, I think I'm feeling that line even more today. Yeah, but as you said, Candy just had an extraordinary way of bringing in the light inside of us and moving us towards it. Yeah.
There is wisdom in this poem that I kind of don't expect from a younger poet.
Oh my gosh, that's so. Oh my gosh, so
I mean,
disrespectful.
it's hard. The hard won insight in the lines. I was outside myself. The spiritual work didn't get done. How did you arrive at that insight?
I think I spend a lot of time with older people. A lot of my mentorship is, people that have mentored me have really, I'm very, very, very grateful for. And so actually, a lot of their guidance, has, helped me be who I am. And I think, that also comes with, we all have a very, we all have this inner life that we need to nurture and nourish. And I think so often we can be, very distracted by what's going on around us and, look at the external rather than the internal. And even just writing poems is not enough for me to nourish and nurture that, the spirituality that I have, that inner self. And so, yeah, it's really finding ways to do that, ways to connect. Sometimes for me, it's about being on my grandmother's country. Sometimes it's through, finding different forms of therapy that are, non-traditional and non-Western, and really just, trying to sort of surround myself with as much self-compassion and self-love that I can.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it just strikes me that some people never do the spiritual work. So it's wonderful when people do. I think it changes people a lot.
Definitely.
I'm struck again, as I am throughout this book, by the connections you make in this poem, the connections of stories, of mothers and grandmothers, of rivers to sea. I want to go to the question at the end of the poem where you say, how much would we do without fear? And I want to refer it back to Candy Royale. When I knew her, which was in the last years of her life, she had been tempered by her life experiences into someone who seemed to me at least to be utterly fearless as anyone I've ever known.
Yes, 100%.
Are you suggesting that fear is an impetus to growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I was really, really, really thinking about, obviously, dedicating this poem to her. She's so present in this poem. I'm also thinking,
and she would have loved it.
I'm also just thinking about, I think I've, performed that poem in that, that same venue in Marrickville, to a very supportive crowd. But I think for me, it's very hard. I'm someone who feels sometimes very crippled by fear. I'm very shy. I find it hard to assert myself in a day-to-day world, but then I have this poetry practice, right? And then I also am sometimes, sharing these poems with other people. And sometimes the feedback that I get is overwhelming, because I see, you know, younger people or people of all ages, they crave connection. They want work that speaks to them, and sometimes my work has the ability to speak to other people. And so if it's a message that I want to share, it's not my own message, because it's channeled through people like Candy, who were so fearless, is to really think about, what you would do in your life without fear. You know, if you got to the time of night where all barriers and complications and your own sense of self-doubt and self-limitation could be stripped away from you, and the things that people tell you that you are, that you might not be. If there's a way to sort of free yourself from that and move towards greater possibilities, whether through creative pursuit or anything else that you want to do in your life. So I feel like I have a responsibility to pass on that message, and also to, in some ways, try to embody it, which I try to do when I read it, to try and embody it to make people realize that, you know, I do believe it for myself as well. Yeah.
Just turning to the other poem that you read, "The Body Labours Under Memory." I had a long think about that title, and I wanted to ask you what you meant by it.
This poem, it's going back again to, you know, the theme of memory that's in that first poem. How the body, particularly a body of someone who has a lineage of people that have been, colonized and part of an attempted genocide, how that kind of body moves in space, and how, how we can be, weighed down by a lot that's happened before we have even existed in this world.
Speaking involves, and speaking to people, speaking in public spaces, involves constantly assessing and determining what we should say,
yes,
and what we shouldn't. And we're often saying things that we shouldn't and not saying things that we should. Apart from trying to think first and talk second, is there anything we can do about that very human fallibility?
I think in some ways being cautious is good, and it's not good. And so it's very hard to find, know when we do need to speak up for ourselves. And it's, for example, it could be speaking up on behalf of yourself, but it could be speaking up on behalf of another person. So you could be in a situation where there might be, a sense of authority by another person or group of people, and there's a sense of, something is happening. You witness, an incident that you feel like you can, you could say something. You could go away and wish that you had said something. And there could be also times where, you're in a meeting, you're with friends, you're with family, where you feel like you can assert yourself, for yourself or for other people. But there also is a sense of like, I'm also knowing that to be also someone who's in an observer position is not necessarily a bad thing as well. So that's what this book is doing. It's talking about different ways of being heard and different types of silences that I've observed and that I have experienced.
I was intrigued in the second stanza by the idea that ways of feeling invisible require proper planning. I always felt that ways of feeling visible require proper planning. What do you mean by ways of feeling invisible require proper planning?
Yeah, I think there's a real, I think I know exactly what you're saying. I think, the other way around seems to make more sense, but logical sense. But for me in the poem, its reverse makes more sense to the poem, and yeah.
And the last stanza, all the spit in the world in this pool, especially mine.
Mm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Are you talking about when you talk?
So I can give just a little bit of insight of where that poem was written, which was a pool I was in Munich, Germany. And they have these pretty incredible public pools, pretty elaborate pools that are very, have a lot of history attached to them. And it was around the time where I was thinking about about publishing another poetry collection. There's some other poems in this book that were also written in Germany, where I spent 3 months doing a residency in a post-colonial studies department at the University of Bremen. I think for me, they were very valuable 3 months. I got to sort of meet and hear from a lot of people that were able to sort of show me what I see as a sort of almost other side, where we would do, tours of the places in Germany where you can see the mark that you can see the other side of colonialism. Like, I guess from Australia, we're seeing what is being desecrated, destroyed, taken, but there's a lot, but also the traces of what remains. In Germany, we were going to harbors that had been specifically being built and expanded to bring in the goods that were taken from the colonies. We were looking at the coffee pathways. We were looking at all the material wealth that had been gained from the colonies, and that was for me a very kind of interesting thing to be part of. And so I wrote a few poems, but while I was writing this particular poem, I was thinking about writing a book. For some reason it took being away from Australia for me to start thinking that I wanted to write another poetry book. And that was also when I was having those discussions with my publisher about that. I just had been ignoring her for years, and finally she probably got a response from me. It probably was at 3 a.m. because of the time difference. That okay, I think I might have another manuscript for you.
Do you want to read some more poems?
I will read the last poem. It's getting very warm in Queensland. I'm glad I'm wearing a white shirt because I'm very much starting to sweat. Must be all this talk about poems. And also the people. I really appreciate this space, David, to also just talk about people like Candy, who meant a lot to so many people. Other poets that have been in our lives. And this last poem is about another friend of mine who's still with us, and he's an Indonesian poet called Norman Erickson Pasaribu. So I've dedicated this poem for Norman. We're the same age, but we've had very different experiences, him growing up in Indonesia and me growing up in Australia. We have many discussions also about, you know, I have a Dutch dad. I also have heritage of, you know, European heritage, and it's something that for me, you know, being to Indonesia a few times is something that I have to reckon with, and something that I acknowledge. Just wanting to find out more about, because I think we all need to lean into the truth, and you know, for me, like the Dutch educational system, which I've never been part of because I grew up here, but I know that they really don't, just as Australia did when I was growing up, they don't talk about that, you know, that heritage of that colonial heritage that's really, you know, informed how the Netherlands are today, but you know, they're not taking as much responsibility as they should be, for how they, you know, particularly the killing of Indonesians and other people in the Dutch colonies. So anyway, that's a long preamble, but my friend is from Indigenous heritage. He's a Batak person, queer person. When we were talking, we talk a lot about a lot of different things, but he mentioned to me that how shameful that he felt that he felt like so much of his culture had been lost. And you know, for example, language, things that had been passed down. And you know, he worries, you know, with his parents getting older, that he will never have the opportunity to know all the things that he wants to know. So I just wrote this poem just to reassure him. And it, you know, it does come, in some ways it's also a little bit of an interpretation of the work of Alice Walker, who wrote an essay collection with a similar title, but the poem is called All That Is Loved Can Be Saved. You might find language is inside you, shiny and speckled like a rock that wants someone to sit on it. You might find, instead of an empty silence, your ears filled with wind and sound. Birds hold conversations 1,000 years old. Your loves love your ancient thoughts. They have come to you. It could be a house. It could be the wrinkles in the hands of a man who knows your grandmother. It could be a rain cloud above an equally promising body of water. When you speak, you are in listening. When you dream, you are in dreaming. Close your eyes and feel the space. What is it saying? It could be what you do when you are broken. It could be what you do when you are safe. You might find language is inside you, shiny and speckled, a rock.
That's beautiful. Sure Norman would have loved that. It speaks to me, this poem, of the removal of restraints or boundaries in a way, that there is something vast, expansive, eternal, limitless, full of possibility in this poem. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. I'm glad you picked that up. Yeah, internal, boundless, expansive. It's pushing up against these expectations. You know, I think, you know, there's a sense that people always talk in these, you know, false binaries, or these kind of ideas of things being either still there or lost. Where I see that it's so much more fluid. I think, you know, there's this sense of like, you know, like I think, you know, being a person who connects with my heritage in different ways. I wanted to just share with others that there are many different ways, and there are, there's a lot of hope that, as I say, that anything that you love can be saved, and that love is really the way forward. And so Norman did like that poem, and it started this very much this beautiful, he's a very talented poet and short story writer, this beautiful exchange where he's written poems that have been dedicated to me as well. So it's been really, really lovely. And I think Norman is in, I don't want to speak for him where he is, but I think, that poem was written at a particular time as well, where it may have been helpful for him in his journey, and he might be somewhere over there or over there or over there now. And so it's really nice to have, don't you find with a poem that to have that bit of a time stamp, where a poem can be very specific for a particular time, but it can also be relevant for any time that we might need it.
Yeah, and there's something universal about this poem. It's for Norman, but I think it's for all of its readers. It's a gift, a sharing, an invitation, a love letter from you to all of your readers, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way we perceive the world changes our relationship to the world. So is this poem about an openness to enter space and a way of perceiving?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Just really moving through, expanding what so-called limitations might be on us, and absolutely, like you said, the way that we think about the world changes how we experience moving through it,
because our perceptions can be so limiting.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, that's where reading for me has been a gift, and also just spending time with people from all walks of life and all ages, and having had the wonderful privilege to have traveled as well. The world can be a very big place, and it can be a very small place, and it can be both of these things.
You end the poem as you begin it. You might find languages inside you. You saying there is a kind of navigation to the language we need until we do find it? Or are you wanting to share a sense of empowerment at the possibility of language?
I think both. I think, the language that we need is always inside us if we can unlock it. But also wanting to send a message of empowerment, of being able to know, just that knowing that we will find what we need at the right time.
It's waiting for us.
It is waiting for us. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to read another poem?
I think that's I want to sort of leave on that poem because.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing your poems and exploring your experiences, thoughts, and insights on the theme of coexistence. I think we've got details of your books to post with this podcast, so I'll ask viewers to look out for that. Poets Corner will soon be posting a live event recording of me in conversation with the poet Ali Whitelock, which is happening here in Sydney tonight. And we'll be back in 2024 with another program of podcasts, including a very special podcast on the late Robert Adamson. Stay tuned.